they need to get that vote tomorrow.
Today, we're announcing new legislation for stronger measures than ever before to combat gun violence in Canada.
I think Mr. Trudeau misleads people when he tries to suggest that buying things back from hunters and other Canadians who are law-abiding is somehow going to solve the problem of shooting and criminal gang activity in the big cities.
Welcome to Power and Politics. I'm Vashi Capellos. The federal government is taking steps to implement gun restrictions. It's proposing to buy back guns banned last spring from the Canadians who own them. About 1,500 makes and models are included in that ban on assault-style weapons. But anyone who owns one does have the option to keep it as long as they comply with strict storage rules. The legislation would also give cities the power to ban handguns, and it includes stiffer criminal penalties for gun smuggling and trafficking. How effective might Bill C-21 be in curbing gun violence, and does it fulfill the Liberals' campaign promises? Let's bring in the Power Panel to talk about that. Supriya Dwivedi, Françoise Boivin, Shakir Chambers, and Jason Markoshoff. We were talking just briefly about the politics behind this, because this is always a very political issue. It has real consequences, like so many issues, but it is political. Shakir, what do you think the Liberals are hoping to accomplish with what they announced today, and where might they face some challenges?
I think this is good political positioning for them in terms of how they roll out this legislation. They committed to this during the previous election. They're rolling out the legislation now. But I think when it comes to the municipal restrictions on the gun ban, I think they're going to have a lot of barriers there. There are a lot of provinces, Ontario, Alberta, Saskatchewan, that are very opposed to this. I'm not sure how the federal government moves forward without their support on this. But I think when you look at the way this was rolled out by the Liberals, it has everything of electioneering, if you will. I know Trudeau said during his press conference he wants to remove the politics from this. I know he mentioned there's going to be the gun lobby is going to be very aggressive towards the Liberals on this. But if you look at the way he announced this particular legislation, it is very political. I mean, he had 4 of his more senior, well-known ministers announcing this legislation. I think especially when you look at the way he's positioning the municipal aspect of it, there's this notion that we can take the support from Canadians in terms of implementing something, a restriction around handguns, without doing all the heavy lifting. And the heavy lifting is going to fall in the lap of the municipalities that pretty much to choose to opt into this legislation if they want to have this ban. And I think a lot of supporters, a lot of experts, even a lot of gun advocates have said having this opt-in legislation, having this patchwork framework moving forward is just not the way to go about a gun ban if that's what you want to pursue. So I think ultimately for the Liberals, a lot of politics surrounding this. Given the framework we're in with the NDP also doing very campaign-style announcements, I mean, we can see what's kind of in the air here. We'll see if it actually plays out.
Who do you think, Supriya, and you touched on this, but who do you think the Liberals are trying to speak to when it comes to the announcement they made today?
I think, honestly, a lot of urban and suburban residents, and I don't think it's, a small piece of the pie here to consider that there are many municipal councillors across this country who have been clamoring for this very thing for quite some time. So Shakir is right with respect to it being quote unquote good politics, with like a capital partisan P there, because this does play very well to who traditionally tends to vote for the Liberals. And I mentioned this earlier in the express round, but with respect to who is kind of opposing this right now, I mean, you have groups that would be for something similar to a national handgun ban and that are for more onerous restrictions, basically coming out and saying that this isn't good enough. This isn't necessarily what they had in mind. And then you also have gun advocates, including the very well-organized gun lobby, that is coming out and claiming that this bill is way too restrictive and it's way too onerous and it's doing things that it simply does not do. So, I mean, obviously the truth lies somewhere in the middle. I think a lot of the criticism with respect to this not necessarily making a huge dent with respect to illegal gun smuggling and organized crime is valid, but I think a stat that gets lost in all of this is that 3/4 of all gun deaths in this country are by suicide. And so if we take that number and you take what some of the frontline physicians that are in our emergency rooms and the trauma surgeons who have had to deal with these injuries and death in these situations, to hear their call with respect to this, it's kind of hard to see how it won't make a dent, at least in that that 3/4 number that I threw out there.
Yeah, I guess the other question I have, Francoise, is around, for example, as Supriya put it, if they're aiming it at that large segment of the population that lives in these urban centers, to Shakir's point as well, if it ends up that not all municipalities bring it in because provinces stand in the way or because they don't want to, or if it does end up creating that patchwork effect, does that then have any implications for them in the effectiveness of it or the perception of the effectiveness of it? Or is that too far off that it might not even be something that factors into anyone's electoral calculation in the coming months?
Well, that's actually what saddens me with that piece of legislation, is that this piece of legislation was written with a lot of victims and high-profile cases. We had one drive-by shooting not too long ago in Montreal. Toronto has lots. Ottawa has many of those also. And every time we have the politicians saying they will do something. I was a justice critic at the time when Stephen Harper was trying to abroger the long gun registry. It was really, really a sensitive issue amongst every caucus, NDP, Liberals, Bloc, everybody, Conservative, for all the different reasons, and depending on which section of the country you represented. What I find sad today is that it's more about the narrative than actually doing something intelligent with the file. We all know that it's all about illegal guns. It's all about a gang, about the black market of, and it doesn't really touch these aspects, but it permits every candidates on different banners to go around their area and say, oh, we'll fight this because they're going after the hunters if you're leaning that way, or go in Montreal or Toronto and say, oh, but we presented a bill C-23, I think it is, to solve your problem. We're there for you. But I agree that people generally, the Canadian public in a vast majority, want something serious being done. Not just rhetoric, but remember that since Polytechnique in '89, nothing really of consequences has really been done to do something serious. And I had people from Polytechnique today being really, really depressed and discouraged that they have to fight that battle. Still, it's not solved, so it tells me all.
But to your earlier point about how sensitive the issue is in every caucus, Jason, are the Liberals navigating kind of the middle ground here, which is in other instances has been politically successful for them? I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but is that what they're doing?
I'm sure that that's going to be the feeling out of Liberal camps a lot. That a lot of gun control advocates are saying we didn't do enough. The Conservatives are going to the races, calling this a gun grab. We're in the middle. In the middle is where not much is going to happen. I mean, the Liberals have long faced a challenge on this file because they are trying to legislate and show action. It's very much a show at this point because we live in a country where guns are already quite highly restricted. You can't carry them around. We often think about what the rules are in the States and how long an arduous fight there is for them to restrict their gun situation. Ours is very, very restricted, which is why they're trying to put measures forward that suggest and move in the direction of action, but don't move to actual, very firm action, in part because they don't want to inflame people in rural Canada. They have memories of long gun registry. If I could deduce a rationale, but why they didn't make this buyback mandatory is because they want to avoid, being called gun grabbers. They want to give people the option to keep their guns that they can't use. But they really want to be able to show what they're able to do. They want to give some comfort to people who are victims and some people who are concerned, but they also want to be able to put something in the window that they're doing this much more strongly than the Conservatives will be.
Okay, on that note, I'll take a quick commercial break, but we have more Power Panel on the other end of that break. We are going to talk about the Conservatives' call for the Liberals to push for a move for the 2022 Beijing Olympics. Stay with us.